Across the country, law enforcement is leading the charge to advance justice. To help us understand how law enforcement is making change in communities across the country, please welcome NDCI Director Vanessa Price, Georgetown, Kentucky Chief of Police Mike Bosse, and Lafourche, Parish, Louisiana Sheriff Craig Webre.
Thank you, Melissa, and welcome everyone. We're so glad that you're back. Last year when we were together, I think one of the last things that we said is when you know better, do better, and we learned a lot. And now we have this opportunity with law enforcement. And we want to really take an opportunity to hear from some experts in the field with some extensive knowledge with regard to the issue of public health and public safety. And so we're going to have a conversation with them and find out what their expertise say. Chief Bosse and Sheriff Webre, we are certainly glad you're here. And when we take a look at law enforcement and we really understand what their role is as first responders, how do you think that role plays into their ability to address the public health issue while still maintaining public safety for them and for the community?
I think, I've always enjoyed a good investigator. I've always enjoyed the investigator that solves his cases, and I like watching what he does, what he or she does with their investigations. And, they go to the scene and they preliminary look at everything and they see what's on the surface. And, but then they don't stop there. They dig deeper. They do a more thorough job. A good investigator keeps digging for answers. I think we have, in law enforcement today, gotten into this mode where we're very call-driven. And so we go to the call, we look at the surface, and we move on to the next call. That's partly a staffing issue, but partly a philosophy issue. There's no reason we can't, as police officers, on each call for service, look more deeply into the issue. And most of the time, as you know, we'll find some other aspects that have led to the problem. Sometimes it's mental illness, sometimes it's substance abuse. And discovering that is part of our getting better at the job. But that doesn't happen unless our leaders of the organizations buy into that idea. And in the end, I would profess that in the long run, if we don't have to keep going back to that same call time after time, we actually save time by doing a thorough job in the first place, identifying the underlying issue and helping that person to address that issue.
Okay, thank you. Sheriff?
Vanessa, I have a perspective with respect to how we are policing today and how we're going to be policing in the future. I think law enforcement is undergoing a transformative watershed period in our development. We now live in a world of ubiquitous transparency. And what we do and how we do it and how we are judged is on the front page of every newspaper and the lead story on every news station, almost instantaneous with the event happening. So to that end, law enforcement's going to redefine itself, and I think we'll be better in the end once we do that. Louisiana, where I'm from, is noted for many wonderful things. Some of the things that we're not so good at is the area of incarceration. We lead the country and, of course, lead the world in incarceration. Last year, I had the honor and pleasure of working with the governor and the legislature and many stakeholders to pass a very comprehensive justice reinvestment legislation, which looks at the whole process of who we incarcerate, when we incarcerate, how long we incarcerate, and what are the alternatives, the community-based alternatives. And that filters down throughout the entire system. As an elected sheriff, I have a unique perspective because not only do we provide, like the chief, law enforcement services on the front end, we investigate crimes, as he mentioned, but we run the jails of the country. And so we receive the people who get arrested. We're like an emergency room. You never know if someone's going to come in with serious mental health issues, if they're going to come in with physical problems, if they're going to be LGBTQ or whatever the case may be. And so we are fortunate that we have that opportunity as an elected official to have a platform to help move change in the policymakers that move the change. And we also know that the jails that take in the people that oftentimes are not suitable for jails. You know, we for example, I used to often say we have people that are serving a life sentence 30 days at a time. They cycle in and cycle out. And by having first responders have alternatives, we can prevent crime and make our communities safer, because we can address that in the way that drug courts address addiction and stop that cycle of repeat offending.
Thank you for that. You mentioned something I want to come back to and pose that question to Chief Bosse, is you said there have to be innovative ways to look at options. We know in drug court what the research says is that once you hit that benchmark of 6 days, after that it becomes family to them. It becomes normal. It defeats its purpose as far as putting someone in jail. And so, Chief Bosse, I know I've heard you speak about some of those innovative programs that operate outside of drug court even, and of putting them in jail. So can you share with us some of those and how those play a role in that public health issue?
We started an angel program at my agency, and I wasn't sure how well it would be received by the officers, but we designed the program to have a victim's advocate and 5 officers. And the way the program works is if you have a substance abuse issue, you can come into the lobby of the police department. If you want to give us your drugs, we'll book them into evidence with no charges. But then we sit down with you and we find you treatment. And that means we may have to take you to the other end of the state, but my officers will put you in a cruiser and we'll drive you to that facility. And it's been very educational for my officers, because one of the things that we don't have time to do is learn about the person who's dealing with the issue, because so often we're call driven. We're going from one call to the next. This puts the officer in the car with the person they're trying to help. They learn a story about human behavior, how this whole thing came about. And on the issue of victims advocates, victims advocates don't always see things the way that police officers see things. Mm-hmm. But that's okay. It's okay to have that difficult discussion sometimes, because it's good to have a different perspective on things. And so we employ a victims advocate inside our agency, and it has been beneficial to my officers. Again, they don't always agree, but the conversation needs to be had. And I would say this, Vanessa. We should be bold in our beliefs, but humble in our delivery on this issue with this group of people. I love police officers. I love police officers because of what they do, the risks they take, the challenges they take on, the fact that they'll stand in that arena while everybody's watching and try to deal with a complicated human issue as best they can. I love that they have the courage to do that. This is not fixing justice. This is advancing justice. This is making us better. And I think we should be sure to deliver that message that way, because this is a good group of people who believe in what they're doing.
Absolutely. I love what you said about be bold in your beliefs, but humble in your delivery. And oftentimes, if we take that approach, we can look at the issue of addressing public health as well as community safety, the safety of the public, in a collaborative approach. And so when we talk about collaborations and we talk about really as a part of advancing justice, one of the things that we want to do is we want to have the community, have the stakeholders to understand that there are options out there. And like you said, we have to have an opportunity to have those conversations. So how do you feel law enforcement plays a role in being a part of implementing systemic change with regard to public health without criminalizing substance use disorder and mental health issues, and yet building those collaborations through that multidisciplinary approach?
Well, you know, Vanessa, in 27 years of being sheriff, I've never had an ambulance come to my jail or a police car, drop someone off with a broken leg or having a heart attack and say, here's your problem. But every day, all across the country, people who are schizophrenic, who are bipolar, who are addicted, who are poor, who are homeless, are put into incarceration, and that's an inappropriate response. The collaboration piece is critical for a lot of reasons. One, I hire correctional officers who are trained to work a specific job, and I hire police officers that are trained to be out on the street and enforce the law. Without the collaboration, it's hard for any one component of the system to say, I will take all of the risk. You know, we, in particular, school shootings are on the forefront of our agenda. And with the Parkland shooting recently, we just had this incredible spike across the parish. Everyone from an 8-year-old child to an 18-year-old student coming in saying that they were going to harm other people. And so there was this immediate response that people were getting charged, they were setting high bonds, they were being diverted, some in electronic monitoring, some into juvenile. But no one organization is going to, on its own, be able to stand and say this is the alternative without the collaboration of the other stakeholders and the expertise that they bring to the table, the knowledge that they bring in, the assessment tools, risk assessments and needs assessments, and they work hand in hand, because once you address the needs, you lower the risk, or hopefully you lower the risk. So you need the valid, reliable tools and the research behind them and the people that implement those strategies, and NADCP is a perfect example of that, of reliable, valid. You need best practices that are evidence-based, that are proven. You don't want to try the latest, greatest snake oil remedy. I've gone through this whole evolution of where boot camps were the end-all, be-all to juvenile problems, and we've seen that that had a limited effect on a limited small group of people, and it actually had some adverse effects. So the collaboration piece is necessary to bring the brain power in, to understand the various disciplines and what their role is in the criminal justice system, and to legitimize for that police officer the alternatives that exist. You know, whether you're dealing with tasing someone or someone in mental distress, or simply removing someone from a coffee house or taking them off of an airplane, we have to legitimize alternatives to the traditional law enforcement role, and having this dialogue among people who are in law enforcement with people who are in treatment, who are in adjudication, who are in prosecution, who are NGOs, I think advances that whole agenda and makes us better at what we do.
You had me at risk and need assessments, because that's such a critical part of the process, is understanding what you're dealing with those individuals. So thank you for that answer. Chief Bosse?
I think from a very practical standpoint, for issues of mental illness, the CIT training that we have developed in this country, I think it should be mandatory for every police officer. There is such a difference. There is such a difference in that officer that has the CIT training and recognizes that it's a mental illness issue that they're dealing with. Because it can be frightening. It's frightening for anybody sometimes with the bizarre behavior that you encounter. And with that comes mistakes on the officer's part. But recognizing that you're dealing with a mental health issue in the very beginning is huge for a proper response. And again, that takes our leaders in law enforcement recognizing that, first of all, it's the more humane way to do things. Absolutely. But there's a very practical reason, liability-wise, to have your officers trained in CIT training. And then to cross over to our substance abuse, the more officers understand about substance abuse and why there's a loss of control and why why they might see some of these defeatist behaviors in individuals, helps them to understand and to have the patience, just like we would a family member. It's always better for a family member to understand something about addiction, because if you don't, you think, my God, is that person doing that on purpose just to make me mad?
Absolutely.
When in reality, it's a disease, and once you understand that's part of that disease, is you're going to see those kinds of behaviors. It helps our officers, I think.
I think it's so important that we all understand that substance use disorder and mental health issues are public health issues. And for so long, we've dealt with them by criminalizing them. And I'm excited to hear what you all have said because it's really right in line with what NADCP is doing to advance justice. We really have focused on getting everyone to know and understand what a risk need responsivity looks like for a drug court program, but for the individuals working in it so they can understand that process. You mentioned CIT. We actually have some CIT training that's going to happen here. With officers that are active in a local CIT program, and they are actually trainers. So NADCP has recognized that part of our role in advancing justice is to hear the voice of the communities that we're serving at all of those decision points that come into the criminal justice system. And so with that, it gives me great pleasure to know that we're doing the right thing. And then the last thing is Chief Bosse, you mentioned the value of training law enforcement. And I have said for the last 18 years that I was at the police department, had I known about substance use disorder when I was in the academy, I would have responded a lot differently to those individuals on those calls for services, much like you're alluding to, Sheriff. And so one of the things that we're going to try to do is to put that curriculum together, to roll that out to law enforcement so they have an opportunity to take a look at how they can better improve their responses, and then in that way reduce calls for service, reduce incidents where there's an escalation of use of force, and really be able to deal with people from the human kindness side. I heard a gentleman yesterday that spoke, and he says, you know, the badge really is the heartbeat of that community, and how you share that part of your heart with that community really makes a difference. And that's really what advancing justice is about, is making sure that those opportunities are out there. And I want to, on behalf of NADCP, thank the both of you for your time and coming here and being a part of this panel. And if you all will join me in thanking them.